Hey guys, Scripted here with another video, and this is the final part 4 of the Luke versus Rey debate, where I take the clips and the scenes and show them against each other between what Luke is doing, what Rey is doing, and this is all being done due to this idea that's out there from a lot of fans that Luke and Rey are the same, or that Rey is not a Mary Sue and she went through the same things as Luke. And there's a lot of debate about it on social media, whether it's Reddit or whether it's Twitter or whether it's whatever. But it's nice to see the clips side by side and what's actually going on. And if you want to check out the first 3 parts, I talk about visions, I talk about training, I talk about lightsaber ability, I talk about a whole bunch of topics. And then I want to save this one because I think this is the biggest one for the final video. And this one we're dealing with the use of the Force and how realistic it is and how they came to understand what they were doing and all of those notions. So anyways, let's start off with this clip from Rey from The Force Awakens.
Tell me about the droid.
He's a BB unit with a selenium drive and a thermal hyperscan vindicator.
It's carrying a section of a navigational chart, and we have the rest. Recovered from the archives of the Empire, but we need the last piece, and somehow you convinced the droid to show it to you. You, the scavenger. You know I can take whatever I want.
So here, the stage is set, and Kylo is saying to Rey he needs to know what she knows about the map that she saw. That's the completed section from BB-8, okay? So, as corny as that was to me at the time, that's what he's doing. So they've established that he is trying to enter her mind for the sole goal of discovering what she knows and what she saw on that map to where Luke Skywalker is, because that's his goal, is to find Luke Skywalker. So we got to establish that first off.
You're so lonely. So afraid to leave. At night, desperate to sleep. You imagine an ocean. I see it.
Again, it's important to establish here, listen to what he's saying. He's seeing what her thoughts are about where she lived and what she would dream about, whether it's the oceans, stuff like that. This is what's going on right now, and this is important to know as I explain, in a couple minutes here, what they attempted to convince us of after the fact.
He would have disappointed you.
Get out of my head.
Okay, so again, he's searching around her brain and seeing different stuff, and she says, "Get out of my head." This is important. So then she continues to try and resist him, and then she says, "I'm not going to give you anything." And again, Kylo reiterates he's looking for the map. He says, "You've seen it, and I'm going to find it in your brain." It doesn't really matter whether she remembers it or not. It's in her brain because she saw it, right? Okay, so then she continues to resist, and there's this kind of cheesy, stare fight. And as she does many, many times, she becomes kind of mad or angry, and somehow that, number one, that makes her become more powerful, but she also seems to be able to do that on a regular basis throughout the trilogy without ever falling to the dark side, which is, of course, counter to the original lore we got from Yoda. But she does at the very end of this say that gives you an indication that she got a little bit out of him as well at the end, right? She got that he is afraid. And so, we've established that this is as far as it's gone, right? And then Kylo just leaves at that point. I don't know if he's just butthurt. They don't really say. He just leaves. He just up and leaves.
You will remove these restraints and leave this cell with the door open.
And then we have this scene where Rey somehow understands how to do a Jedi mind trick. And you recall when that was used in the original Star Wars.
You don't need to see his identification.
We don't need to see his identification.
These aren't the droids you're looking for.
These aren't the droids we're looking for.
Move along.
Move along. Move along.
Now, one thing that's important to understand here is that we don't see any Padawans doing Jedi mind tricks. Okay? That's new, just starting out trained Jedi do not do Jedi mind tricks. The times we see it being attempted is by people like Qui-Gon, people like Obi-Wan Kenobi. At the very least, guys that have been in the business of Jediing for at least a while. Not just some kid or some noob. Let alone somebody that just literally found out the Force exists 4 hours ago or whatever it is, right?
You will remove these restraints and leave this cell with the door open.
I'll tighten those restraints. Scavenger scum.
You will remove these restraints and leave this cell with the door open.
I will remove these restraints and leave the cell with the door open.
And you'll drop your weapon?
And I'll drop my weapon.
And I'm bringing this up because this is one of the things that gets argued is that, well, Disney said in a book or whatever after the fact that she downloaded Kylo's training. So by resisting Kylo, and literally we see in the scene, all she gets out of it is, oh, you're afraid. She senses fear in him. Okay? So that's her first sort of Force use, is her sensing fear in Kylo. Now, she has no business doing that without absolutely any knowledge of anything. But that is at least, okay, you know, it's dumb, but it's not egregious. But the idea that she downloaded his entire training program, and of course they had to say that after the fact, because it doesn't make sense that she would do a Jedi mind trick, because she doesn't even know it exists. So very early on, it starts to go off the rails with her Force abilities, and I know this wasn't a Luke comparison, it was an Obi-Wan comparison, but the comparison is that Luke is witnessing this, and therefore you could conceivably say later on when he learns to do it, he would be learning to do it knowing that it can be done, not just doing it because they're doing it, which is a very different position to have than what you have with Rey.
It's okay that we're here.
It's okay that you're here.
It's good.
You're relieved that we're here.
Thank goodness you're here.
Welcome, guys.
We're looking for a prisoner and his belongings.
Then she's doing it again and doing it like a pro, I guess, in The Rise of Skywalker. But she had never witnessed this. So the only argument you could make here is that she got it from the Jedi texts. But having said that, she already knew how to do it without the Jedi texts. She did it literally day one. So, again, something that was reserved for seasoned veterans of the Force is now just a thing you do. And it's not that big of a deal. Which is sort of a thing that Disney's been doing with everything. Like you look at Sabine and just all of a sudden she's got these Force powers and stuff. So, it's just the difference with how much they use the Force. Because Luke in the original really doesn't at all. And I'll explain because, and I did touch on this in another video. Obviously, you have him with the blast shield. He blocks a couple of the little blaster shots from the training droid. But that's about it. And the argument was from some of these people that are saying that there's an equivalence between Rey and Luke's Force powers that, oh, well, he guided the torpedoes into the Death Star with the Force. But when you watch the scene, that's not exactly what happens, because we have the scene where, you know, the rebels are all preparing for the attack and the briefing, and you see the torpedoes turn. So when they turn, when Luke shoots them, that's not him doing that. That's how they're designed. It shows it in the briefing. And the other thing they mention is the fact that he doesn't use the targeting computer. And if you listen to what Obi-Wan is saying there, he says to him, let go and trust. And so that's not an issue of he's teaching Luke to just use the Force to turn torpedoes that already are meant to turn. He's telling him to trust his instincts and feelings and what he knows and what he's learned by doing the things he was doing. We've already established in this film earlier that he was shooting womp rats and all this stuff in these little targets. And so he kind of had some experience, and then it's just trust in the Force and yourself, rather than using the targeting computer, not propelling photon torpedoes. There's a big, big difference. So already we're seeing in the first films of these two characters a total chasm between Rey, who's never been trained but is doing pretty high-end Force abilities, Jedi mind tricks, and Luke, who's barely been trained, just a little bit with a training remote and a lightsaber, not using the Force at all, just trusting his instincts. and trusting himself. And whatever forceness is in there has nothing to do with turning torpedoes. It's just him letting go, right? That is established. So then we have this complete and total juxtaposed situation where you have Luke is alone in the cave. It's been 3 years since the Death Star, the first Death Star. And he really has to concentrate and really bear down and try and get this lightsaber out of there. We can reasonably assess that he's gained this Force ability over time. There's been enough time in the storyline. Yes, it's done off screen. You can complain about that all you want. But the reality of it is it's at least believable that he would be able to reach that level in that time period. Rey, 2 days after learning the Force, not only pulls the lightsaber out of the snow, she pulls it out of the snow and it flies 30 feet into her hands. We don't see her concentrating or doing anything Luke did, so who knows? But not only did she pull the lightsaber and fling it across, 30 feet of space into her hand, she also was stronger to get it to her than Kylo was. And there's always this argument, Kylo was injured. That doesn't mean he can't pull stuff. He just flung Rey into a tree, right? With the Force just before this, 30 feet into the air. So the idea that she would be powerful enough to overpower him in getting the lightsaber to herself, he was closer to it, way closer to it, and he's been using the Force for 20 years. I think he's 29 years old or something in this movie. So he's even longer than that. And she figured out about the Force today or yesterday. Right? So, very, very total opposite. There's no comparison between the two. The idea that Rey is not a Mary Sue is totally bucked when you see the scenes side by side. It doesn't even make sense. Going back to my earlier point about the idea that Luke was learning things during that 3-year period, Obi-Wan appears to him, instructs him to go to Dagobah. I think it's reasonable to assume that him and Obi-Wan have had potential contact with each other during that 3-year period. And Obi-Wan very likely was helping him with some of these things that he was learning. We don't know, we don't have it on screen, but again, there's enough time period in between to kind of accept that as being realistic. So the next one I want to talk about was this scene at the end of Empire where Luke drops down into the sort of shaft on Bespin. And some people make the argument that he uses the Force to kind of turn himself into one of those pipes so he could escape out the bottom. Totally possible. Again, we're 3 years later. It's totally possible. And it's also totally possible that he didn't, that it just kind of, the airflow and everything, and he just kind of ended up there. We don't totally know, but I will accept that he maybe used the Force to do that. Then, on the other hand, with Rey, and this is, again, a year after learning about the Force and having no training. If you look at my previous videos, she literally had no training. Luke didn't train. She trained herself. She's doing literal Spider-Man jumps. Now, I'm not a huge fan of Ben doing those either. I think it's kind of corny. But at least you could argue, well, he's probably been doing this for a while. Did she learn how to do this in the books? I don't know. All I know is she's doing Spider-Man jumps. If Luke could do a Spider-Man jump, like her, in Empire, he would have just jumped over Vader and ran away. Then ran down. Vader doesn't do Spider-Man jumps. Vader has a little bit of a float, right, when he's fighting Luke on Hoth in the chamber. But no one's doing Superman jumps. But we gotta make her more powerful than any other Jedi we've seen in the movies, right? So she has to be able to do these Spider-Man jumps. And then to make it work, I guess, Kylo does the Spider-Man jumps. But again, if we're going to say Luke used the Force to make his body go down that shaft, the comparison between those two things is so broad that it's just silly. So then we get the final use of the Force at the end of Empire for Luke. So then we get the final use of the Force, which is using the Force to contact Leia. And you get the idea from the scene that it's kind of a feeling. It's a feeling that she gets. It's not necessarily a direct Force use by her. She just feels like he's trying to contact her, and they go back and they find him. So she's got a little bit of an aptitude as well, but again, very low level, rudimentary, and he's obviously spearheading it. So just to recap, in the first 3 years of Luke's experience, 3+ years of Luke's experience, he's used the Force to help him block a couple of little minor blaster shots from the training droid. He pulled a lightsaber out of the snow. He lifted a few rocks. He lifted R2 into the air on Dagobah. He may have directed his body into a shaft as he was falling, to changing his angle a little bit. And he contacted his sister through the Force, who wasn't even out of the atmosphere of Bespin, right? Compared to Rey, who did a Jedi mind trick day one, used the Force to defeat Kylo in a battle, pulled the lightsaber out of the snow and flung it 35 feet. That's just in the first movie for her. That's just in the first 3 days for her. So I'm not even going to finish after The Last Jedi until we do that. So let's look into that now, and that's where it takes an even crazier turn. And so much of this discussion is interesting too, in the sense that not only do we have the Luke and Rey comparison, but in film, and what makes me kind of shocked that people don't put 2 and 2 together with Rey and her unrealistic abilities, is you have so much comparison with Kylo on screen. And this is a prime example, right? They're battling over this lightsaber using the Force, and she's every bit as powerful as him. 20 years. She's 5 days after figuring out the Jedi even exist, right? Let alone the Force. So it's kind of incredible that anyone would be able to rationalize her abilities. I mean, I'm not telling you not to like or dislike the movies themselves, but you have to come to the realization that this does not fit with the lore of Star Wars. It wouldn't really fit with any lore of anything to have somebody just know how to do everything just because. Then we have this just absolutely ludicrous scene where 5 days, 6 days after she learns about the Force and having no training, she's literally lifting, like, this is nuts. Like, again, you put that against Luke in Empire, and he's lifting a few boulders after, being on Dagobah for several weeks. We know that because, again, the Millennium Falcon didn't have a hyperdrive. They had to get all the way to Bespin, blah, blah, blah. Anyways. And when you look at her face when she's lifting them, she doesn't seem to even know what she's doing. She's kind of looking around like, what am I even doing? How is this even possible? That doesn't make any sense. The Force does not work that way. It does not just decide somebody gets to just be the most powerful. There's so much more to it. And we know that because because of the originals and what's spoken of, and then the confirmation of the idea of training in the prequels. So her doing that watching that, I remember thinking, like, this is crazy. Like, this does not make any sense. Now, I'm going to compare now that to the beginning of Jedi, where you could make the argument that maybe Luke actually lifted up the door to the palace using the Force, because I don't see why they would let him in, especially since as soon as he enters, the Grimoire guards get in his way, and then he has to sort of choke them out of the way. Some people say he's using the dark side. We don't know that he choked them to death. He might have just choked them for 15 seconds to get them the heck out of his way and give me a break. Then we come down, and he comes down the stairs, and he meets Bib Fortuna, and he uses a Jedi mind trick on him. And this is where we get it established that you need to have been a Jedi for a while. You need to have been learning this stuff for a while. If Luke could have used a mind trick in the previous 2 films, he would have, but he didn't know how. He knows how now because now he's 4 years in. She was 4 hours in. Like, think about the difference between the two. It's pretty wild, and it's pretty wild that anyone would think that would mean that he's a Gary Stu, Or that she's just not a Mary Sue at all. Like, that's insane. Look at the differences. And then things get really, really dumb with her. And again, I know they want her to be the most powerful, strong female, forces female, blah, blah, whatever. Then she starts doing healing. And healing is something that I don't think Star Wars should have done. I think that's a huge mistake. But if you were going to do it, you got to make it make sense. And there's so many things that are so wrong about this. Number one, the only assumption we can make is she's learned it from the books. But the books were in Luke's possession for how long? He was on that island for, 20 years or something like that? So, or at least, I guess 15, right? And he never bothered. Just had the books there. I don't care about the Jedi, but I'm going to make sure to keep their books safe. And I'm not going to read them or do anything. They're just going to be there. The other side of this that's really crazy is that with healing, you can turn somebody from the dark side. That is canon. That is in the book. That is in the Rise of Skywalker book, that she cleared Kylo's mind of the dark side. So it's not just a healing of just a wound. That, to me, is really, really crazy. And the idea that you're going to get that from the texts and understand how to apply it without a teacher, to me, just isn't realistic. And it's just kind of dumb. And it just kind of feels like they just made her this powerful to make her this powerful, so she's the most powerful. And that's it. And it's like they're competing. It's like Disney's competing to make the most powerful character, because now we have Grogu, right? Who also doesn't make any sense. I guess he must have learned healing at the Jedi Temple. Well, why didn't Obi-Wan teach that to Anakin then, if the Jedi could do it? We know that Palpatine assumed they couldn't do stuff like that. Right? That they couldn't heal. And healing also means saving from dying. This is all in the Rise of Skywalker book. It's the same thing. It's the essence of transfer of your force to them. If somebody at the Jedi Temple knew how to do it, how come we never hear about it in the prequels? And when Anakin was going off the deep end, why didn't Obi-Wan find the guy that knew how to do it and talk to Anakin about it or something? But they just don't do that because it's not a thing. But then Disney's now turned it into a thing and done it so sloppily that it actually ruins the character of Rey even more. It makes her more nonsensical and more unlikable because she just gets stuff. Then we have Luke. He uses the Force to lift up 3PO that these Ewoks think is a god and floats him around for a minute or whatever. Which, again, after 4 years, feels fairly realistic, right? He was lifting the rocks in Empire. He lifted up R2. R2 can't be very light. And that's a year before this. So you're looking at it and you're going, okay, that's realistic. He's not healing snakes. He's not bringing people back to life from the dead. He's lifting up 3PO, who's in a chair, to kind of get these guys to think he's more godly than he is and actually listen to him in terms of roasting them at the stake, right? So it is believable. And one of the things that's so crazy is that it wasn't even enough for Rey to have all of the sort of Jedi level powers. Like we already just discussed that the whole healing and Force Essence transfer thing wasn't really a Jedi thing. It was a Darth Plagueis thing, at least according to Palpatine. But what's really crazy is it wasn't enough for them to give her the Jedi abilities, and let's assume the healing one's part of it, but all these Jedi abilities right away, and there's not really any training, nothing, well, there isn't any. All the rock lifting, all this crazy stuff with no training. Then they decided to have her, in anger, shoot lightning that we saw Palpatine do, and then we saw Snoke do. Palpatine, of course, more excessively than Snoke. Snoke is just a quick little zip, and that's it. But something reserved explicitly for the extreme highest level Sith Lord people. And yes, I'm calling Snoke a Sith Lord. He was trained by Palpatine, guys. Like this whole, he's not Sith. It's dumb. That's another Disney made up crap. But that is believable. The most evil, powerful wizard in the galaxy at the time, it knows how to do something that nobody else knows how to do. And it's a very good power to have, especially if you're an evil guy, because you can just flick it on and deal with people, whatever, right? Whereas Rey's doing it as a Jedi because she gets super mad. So no training, and she knows how to do essentially the most powerful Sith Force thing you can do outside of, I guess, Plagueis creating life. So what the heck is going on? So it wasn't enough for her to have all those Jedi powers super, super easily, way more powerful than Kylo, way more powerful than Luke, and all the things the Jedi do. Now she gets to also be the most powerful, the equivalent to a Palpatine in terms of her. If she wanted to, she could do this. She's done it now. It's so beyond crazy. And then, of course, we all know about her healing Kylo. Okay, whatever. And, this is when it starts to get old. Right? Like, well, it already was getting old, but this is where it starts to get really old. Just the amount of stuff they threw in The Rise of Skywalker, her abilities, it just became so boring and redundant. And it's a lot like Grogu. It's like, oh, nothing's bad's going to happen because this person's so powerful that it's not going to matter. So she can just do whatever. Yay. Like, it's not exciting at all. And then you compare that to Luke, his final bout with the Emperor and Vader. And again, just in a flash of insanity, she's able to move physical objects through the Force. But they're a dyad! Oh, Lord. Yeah, another thing they made up because she was way too powerful and they were trying to justify it, so they made it up after the fact. Yay! And then, of course, you have this final battle with Palpatine, and she's so powerful that she's able to block his lightning. And you think about the boredom level of this, okay? So, again, I love to make this comparison between the last scene in the last scene of with Luke and the Emperor in Return of the Jedi versus this. So, in Return of the Jedi, Luke did not have the ability to defeat the Emperor. Period. There's no possible way. The Emperor was just going to electrocute him into oblivion, which we see. The only hope Luke had was for his father to turn and for him and Luke to go against the Emperor. For example, if it didn't go the way it went and Vader, rather than turning and immediately killing the Emperor, if he walked over to Luke's side and it was Luke and Vader versus the Emperor, you could conceivably believe they may have defeated Palpatine in that scenario. No guarantee, but if it happened that way and they did defeat him, you could be like, you know what? That makes sense. I mean, Vader's the number 2 most powerful guy in the galaxy. He's got Luke there. He's coming into his own. He's pretty strong, and between the two of them, they could probably figure out a way. But that wasn't what happened. Luke couldn't defeat the Emperor. He might have been able to defeat Vader if he continued in his anger, but he does stop himself. But notice his anger doesn't make him shoot lightning or anything crazy like Rey. He just gets mad to the point where he beats down his dad, chops his hand off. And the only way he could defeat the Emperor once that happened, because now Vader's out of commission, essentially, to be fighting and stuff, was to appeal to his father and love. It was love that defeated Palpatine, essentially. Love and sacrifice, right? Whereas with the Rey situation, okay, she has all the Jedi in her, whatever that means, and I guess they were helping her beat him, which just brings up a whole pile of problems. Why didn't all the Jedi help Luke? Why didn't all the Jedi prevent Anakin from being an idiot? Why didn't all the Jedi do all types of things? It's such a stupid concept. But ultimately, it's a power versus power ending rather than a love-sacrifice ending. Which one to you is more appealing and more interesting story-wise? The fact that this girl just was absolutely ridiculously powerful the entire time, always years ahead of the curve, until she eventually just defeats this guy because she just does, because she can do everything. Or the guy who slowly builds, gets a lot of abilities, is the last Jedi, but it's still not enough. It's still not enough to get the job done. And it has to be done through just, you know what, I love my dad, I'm not doing this, this is stupid, kill me, then I don't care. Suicide mission, essentially, right? So, right then and there, I wanted to end on this one because, again, the Force usage stuff is the most egregious of all the topics I've dealt with in this series. Again, go back and watch the other ones. It's all super interesting. It's nice to see the clips side by side and see exactly just how silly it is. So ultimately, there is no debate here. Luke had a normal, natural trajectory that was believable. Rey had a totally unnatural Mary Sue development arc, or lack thereof of an arc, that was not believable at all, completely silly, and it just feels like it was all under the banner of, we can't just have a female Jedi, which is super cool, nobody has a problem with that, everybody likes Ahsoka, but we have to make her just better than everybody ever, because, I don't know. I don't know. Because they thought, like, females would like a character like that and buy tickets to see a woman that doesn't go through anything and is just able to do everything. And no, crying on screen and having emotions is not enough of something to go through. A lot of people will debate that, oh, she went through all this stuff. Look, she didn't know who her mom and dad were, and then she found out she was a Palpatine. Okay, those are all sort of emotional things that, yes, play a role in a story, but you have to have real issues, real problems, real conflicts that you have to overcome, not just ones about your past and you don't know your mommy and daddy. Because in reality, not knowing her mommy and daddy didn't really affect her at all. She was always good, always did the right thing, never had any problems, trained herself. So if they were going to make the mummy-daddy thing a thing, and being left on Jakku a thing, they did a pretty bad job of it. Because it had zero impact on her whatsoever. Anyways, guys, that's the video. Leave me a comment. Love to hear from you, see what you think about this. If you like this content, please like, subscribe. Always helps the channel. Feel free to check anything else on my channel. Have yourselves a really good day.